They marched into the valley at sunrise, and by sunset, 500 warriors were gone without a trace. That was the story men told along the cold coast that spring. It rode the wind in fishing towns and mountain hamlets, a whisper that made lanterns burn a little longer at night. 500 armored riders, banners bright as dawn, went into a narrow pass between cliffs called the Fox's Throat. No bodies were found. No scattered gear. No horses. Only silence, like a closed mouth. Some called it a curse. Others said it was treachery. But the truth lay buried in stone and water and fear, and it waited for the one man who would keep walking after everyone else turned back. He came alone, a sturdy rider with a scar down his jaw and a calm way of listening. He had the bearing of a soldier and the patience of a monk. His name was Daigo. He had carried messages through winter storms and across battle lines for years, and the capital had sent him with a simple order: find out what happened to Lord Ishida's 500. Bring back facts. Nothing else. Daigo reached the coast on a day when the sea looked like hammered iron. The tide bell at the cliff temple clanged in a slow, tired rhythm. Below the ledge, waves broke white against a black shore. A dozen villagers stood with him, hats pulled low, eyes darting to the valley mouth as if it could breathe. That is the Fox's Throat, the headman said, pointing toward two slabs of rock rising from the plain. They went in there. We watched the last banner vanish between those walls, and the sound of their armor was like hail. By dusk, the wind was the only sound. No dead? Daigo asked. Not a single one, sir. Not even a broken spear. Tracks. The headman licked his lips. There were tracks until the first bend, then nothing. The ground is hard there, yes, but not hard enough to hold nothing. We lit torches. We searched until dawn. We found only this. He nodded to a boy, who held out a small object on a cloth. It was a half-circle of lacquer painted with waves, a badge from the back of a helmet. Daigo turned it in his palm. It had been cracked clean, as if something had pressed down on it with great weight. Which way did they march? Daigo asked. From the south, the headman said. They were on their way to the border forts. They passed here at first light. Lord Ishida's blue banner, and the white bird of his vanguard. The leader gave orders to keep a steady pace and not to rest until they crossed the plain. Who led them? Captain Ren, the headman said. A careful man. He always rode with the front rank. He looked toward the sea before they entered the pass, as if he were listening. Daigo tucked the broken badge into his sleeve and walked the edge of the cliff. He let the salt air clear his head. He watched the line where the valley met the shore. It looked harmless, two rocks leaning close, a gravel path, a trickle of water. But heavy things often look harmless until they move. Was there rain? Daigo asked. Not a drop, the headman said. Just wind. That night, we heard a rumble inland, like thunder under the ground. The tide bell swung on its own 3 times. The temple monk said it was a warning. Daigo looked at the bell. The rim of it had a dent the size of a man's thumb, old and smooth by time. Warnings were common along this coast. The land buckled in quiet seasons and roared in others. He set up camp in the empty storehouse near the pier. That night, as he boiled rice, a fisherman came, holding his hat like a shield. Sir, the fisherman said softly. I saw lights that evening. Lights? Daigo said. Lanterns, the fisherman whispered. A river of them, moving in a line along the ridge above the valley. Then, all at once, the line bent and became one bright light, like a star had fallen onto the ground. Could it have been a signal? The fisherman shook his head. No signal I ever saw. I have seen beacons on cliffs and fires in fields when the army drills. This was not that. It was like a lantern swallowed all the others. Daigo thanked him and let the pot simmer. Lanterns swallowed by a bigger light. A bell that swung 3 times in a still night. A valley that kept what it took. He slept with the steady sound of waves and woke before dawn. At first light, he rode toward the Fox's Throat with a local guide. The gravel there was smooth as sifted rice. His horse snorted and planted its feet. The air inside the pass felt cooler, like the rush of wind from a temple door. The walls rose above, striated and dark, pitted by ages of rain. A thin rill flowed down the path, cutting a silver line among stones. Daigo dismounted and crouched. The first stretch of ground held the shallow crescent marks of hooves. Then, as the headman had said, nothing. It was as if 500 men and as many horses had stepped off the earth. He pressed his thumb into the rill, brought it to his tongue, and tasted salt. He looked up. The sea was behind him. The stream ran inward. "That is not right," the guide muttered. Daigo followed the thin water until the pass opened into a basin. The basin was wide and shallow, bounded on 3 sides by stone and on the 4th by knuckled hills. It had grass near the edges and, at its center, a patch of smooth, pale ground that looked like a lake bed in winter. He walked out to it and felt a strange surface through the soles of his boots. It was not ordinary clay. It was glassy, fine as ground shells, and it crunched with a delicate sound. The guide bent and pinched it. "Never seen dirt like this," he said. Daigo rubbed it between finger and thumb. It left a faint gray smear like powdered ash. He smelled it. The sharp tang was not smoke. It was closer to the dry smell of a potter's kiln after the fire is gone. The wind shifted, and he caught a second scent, sour, like bad eggs. He had smelled that once, after a landslide cracked a hill and released breath long trapped inside. He straightened and looked toward the hills, where black pines grew along ridges like comb teeth. 500 riders had entered, crossed this basin, and reached this pale patch. After that, the earth went quiet. He circled the edges. On the northern rim he found a scuff on stone, metal scraping rock. Farther on, he found 3 thin gouges in a row, each the length of a hand, parallel, shallow, and regular. He stared at them a long time. They were not made by a blade or a hoof. They looked like the marks of a heavy thing dragged on a smooth base, a wagon runner or the side of a great chest. He climbed a knoll at the basin's far edge and shaded his eyes. A narrow cut wound uphill between pines. It was too tight for a large column. But it would easily swallow a small party. He looked at his guide. "Did anyone see a cart go in?" Daigo asked. "No," the guide said. "Only the riders." Daigo breathed deep. He had the habit of letting silence answer his questions first. The land told stories when men did not, and this basin had plenty to say. He committed its lines to memory and went back through the pass. At the village, he found a boy at the pier, cleaning a coil of rope that had dried stiff with salt. The boy flinched when Daigo greeted him, then relaxed when he saw the soldiers come. "You were on the cliff the day they marched," Daigo said. "Tell me something only a boy would have noticed." The boy blinked. One of the riders had a farmer's hat tied to his saddle. "Who?" "The man 2 ranks behind the banner with white wings," the boy said, proud to remember. "And the captain's horse had bells on its bridle. I could hear them over the armor." "Bells," Daigo repeated. The boy nodded. "But they stopped after the first bend. They did not ring again." That night, Daigo walked to the cliff temple and spoke with the monk who kept the tide bell. The monk was old and wiry, with eyes that had watched storms stack on the horizon for decades. 3 times the bell swung on its own, the monk said. No hand on the rope. The wind was not strong. Then I heard a low roar, as if a river had turned and run backward. "From inland?" Daigo asked. "Yes," the monk said. And much later, the sea went still as a bowl. In the morning, there were fish flopping in the tide pools that do not swim near this shore. They looked lost. "Did the sea rise?" "No," the monk said. "That is the part that chills me. It should have, with a sound like that. But the water stayed where it was." Daigo thanked him and left a small coin at the rail. He stood beneath the bell and ran his hand across the dented rim. A river turning in its bed without the sea's help. A basin with glassy ground. A wind that brought sour breath from the hills. He had seen inland lakes in mountain bowls. He had seen natural dams of earth and old stone hold back a weight that pressed for release. He knew a different kind of tide could rise in a valley without touching the coast. In the morning, he rode south to Lord Ishida's manor. The walls were clean, the banners steady, the courtyard swept. Yet there was a nervousness in the air like a bird that had heard a hawk pass but could not see it. Lord Ishida was calm and watchful. He had a scholar's hands and a soldier's shoulders. You came quick, the Lord said, greeting Daigo in the garden. I asked for a man who could see a thin track in the dark. That is what they say of you. They flatter me, Daigo said. I hear only what the rocks tell me. I ask for faces to match the names in the reports. I need to speak with Captain Ren's steward. The Lord nodded. Kajiwara. He returned when the column did not. He says he was sent back to fetch engineers. He waits in the west wing. Kajiwara came into the garden with a careful bow. He had neat hair and the look of a man who did not like to sweat. He told the same story he had told every day since he returned. We were to cross the fox's throat before noon, he said. Captain Ren ordered me to ride back and hurry the bridge crew. He said the mountain way had narrow places. He wanted beams ready in case a crossing failed. I obeyed. When I returned in the afternoon, the column was gone. Which bridge? Daigo asked. The old log bridge over the Black Channel, Kajiwara said. The storm last winter weakened it. Captain Ren knew about the damage. Yes. He had a list of weak places for every road on this route, Kajiwara said, almost proudly. He always kept his lists dry under waxed cloth. May I see the list? Daigo asked. It is gone, Kajiwara said. Captain Ren carried it when he rode ahead. What path did he favor when not marching in bright sun? Daigo asked. The hidden basin way, Kajiwara said. He said a shadowed path keeps men cooler and makes a smaller target. Daigo kept his face still. Hidden basin. That was what locals called the flat bowl beyond the fox's throat. When names fit too neatly, he grew cautious. One of Lord Ishida's officers, a stiff man with a straight mouth, stepped closer. There is talk of betrayal, he said. If you find a traitor, I will haul him here by his hair. I would rather tie his hands and bring him in alive, Daigo said. The officer frowned. You are too patient. And you are too certain, Daigo replied, not unkindly. Certainty kills quicker than a blade when the ground under it shifts. He left the manor and rode inland along the ridge above the basin. The path was narrow and cut into the side of the rock, used by charcoal burners and hunters. He found a ledge shaded by pines and set his palm on it. Fine grit slicked under his fingers. He rubbed it and held it to the light. The bit sparkled faintly. Not ash. A dust of crushed glass. His mind went to potters and kilns and the hard wind of a fire that melts earth. He sniffed again and felt the sourness catch in his throat. As he followed the ridge path, the land made a sound, not a single sound, but a woven one. A breath through reeds. A hum like a deep drum. He stopped, turned his head, and listened. The sound grew as the path curled inward, and then it changed pitch, as if the land itself tuned itself on a string. He found the source in a small cleft where the rock had split long ago. The crack went down into darkness. Cold air breathed from it, steady and sure. He dropped a pebble, and after a count of 10 he heard it tap stone. A hollow place beneath. A big one. He marked the cleft with a knot of grass and climbed down to the basin again. As the sun sloped west, shadows stretched across the pale patch at the center, and the surface seemed to drink them as a pond drinks rain. That evening, he ate in the storehouse and watched the harbor. A man with a sailor's shoulder sat near the door, knitting a net with calloused hands. He had scars up his forearms, white and smooth, the kind water makes when it burns. You have been in a fire at sea, Daigo said. The sailor nodded once. A boiling sea. Where? Daigo asked. In the Bay of Silent Stone, the sailor said. An inland pocket where a river meets a cave. I grew up there. Once, when I was a boy, we saw the water steaming on a cold day. It bubbled like a pot left on coals. The elders told us to stay away. They said the ground was breathing. Silent Stone is inland? Daigo asked. 2 days' walk inland, the sailor said. We would carry salt from the coast through the hills to sell to the miners. There was a tunnel network beneath those hills, older than our grandfathers' grandfathers, cut for salt and iron. The air there sang when the wind was right. We called it the wind harp. Daigo looked at the man's hands again and then at the lamp flame. Do you know a way in? I know one, the sailor said slowly. But it was sealed after a collapse, and men fear it. People fear many doors, Daigo said, especially the ones that open on answers. The sailor's jaw worked once, as if he were chewing something hard. I will show you the entrance for the price of a barrel of rice for my village. That is my price and my prayer. You have it, Daigo said without looking away. They set out at dawn. Daigo brought a pack with rope, hooks, a small saw, a lantern with a hood, and steady food. The sailor, who gave his name as Toru, carried a coil of line and a crowbar polished by use. They followed deer trails into hills thick with ferns. The sound of the sea fell away. The trees opened to a flat table of stone crossed by fissures like old lightning. Toru led him to a place where the earth had slumped. A low wall of stacked rocks, toppled in places, marked a doorway that had been closed in a hurry generations ago. This is the one, Toru whispered. Daigo pried loose the top stones. Cold air flowed from the gap. He lowered the lantern and slid into the dark. The tunnel beyond was smooth and straight, just high enough for a man to walk without stooping. The walls gleamed where minerals had wept and dried. Old tool marks lined the sides. The floor was clean of loose grit, swept by ancient hands, or by wind that moved like a slow river. As they walked deeper, the humming sound grew, wrapped around them, and set the small hairs along Daigo's arms on edge. They came to an opening carved like a throat. The tunnel sloped down. The air thickened with damp. Ahead, in the lantern's reach, a flat pale surface began, like the basin's center. It shone faintly, a ripple frozen in time. Daigo set his boot on it and pressed. It flexed a little, like very old ice. Not stone, Toru murmured. Not wood. What is it? Something poured, Daigo said softly. Years of seeping water left minerals behind, layer on layer, until they sealed the floor. A lake hid under rock and taught the path how to sleep. He edged forward. The passage widened into a chamber. It had high, arched sides and a ceiling black with a shell of soot. On a ledge to the left, he found ash that crumbled like old bread and the green, brittle tail of a burned reed torch. On the right, he found scratches at chest level, a hand had carved tally marks into the wall. He counted, 1 group to 10, then 10 groups, then more. 312. He touched the notches the way one touches names on old wood. Daigo had never met the men who made them, but their small, firm marks made his throat tighten. Toru found another ledge. Here, he said, pointing. A circle had been cut into the smooth wall with the tip of a dagger. Inside the circle, a simple bird with spread wings was carved, the white bird from the vanguard banner. Daigo stood very still. He could see the men now in his mind's eye. They had come into the basin. Something had moved. Water. Stone. They had taken the hidden path, either to find shade, or because they had been told to do so at the right time, for reasons they trusted. Then the way back had closed, and they had lit their torches and begun to count the days. He walked the chamber edge and found an opening at knee height where the mineral crust had grown thin. He tapped it and heard a hollow sound on the other side. He pressed his ear to it. The deep hum rolled like distant thunder. He widened the hole with the crowbar and peered in. A chasm yawned beyond, and at the bottom, a black water mirror lay still as night. A trickle ran along the far wall and fell in silver lines, etching a path into the pool. In the pool's surface, the lantern's flame doubled and blurred as if the water did not like to be seen. A line of something pale lay along a narrow shelf, the bones of a mule or small horse. Daigo steadied his breath. He had seen much on roads. He did not look away when the world showed him a hard truth, but he did not bother it with more words than it required. They crossed the chamber and entered a smaller passage. Here the air warmed, and the sour smell grew. He held the lantern out, and the flame wavered. The walls appeared damp not from water but from a sheen that caught the light like oil. What is that? Toru asked. Breath of the earth, Daigo said. A place where the stone cooks, far below. You could heat a pot here without fire. The passage ended in a slit that rose like a chimney. Above, a shaft of day struck down the dust in a pale spear. He set the lantern aside and climbed, testing each hold, until he could wedge his shoulders in a notch and look out. He saw the basin, the pale ground, the hills. He saw, too, a low earthen bank at the basin's far side, curved, deliberate, and scarred by a long, smooth cut. It could have been a natural ridge. But it was not. Daigo had seen the lines men made when they raised a mound to hold water and the lines water made when it ran where it had not been a moment before. The earth there had been lifted by hands, tamped by feet, and sliced by a breaking wave from within. He climbed down and pressed his knuckles to his lips for a long breath. Toru watched him, eyes narrowed. "Say it," Toru said. "Someone dammed a lake inside these hills," Daigo said. "They closed its outlet with earth and stone. They waited for the column to enter the basin." The bell on the captain's bridle stopped after the first bend because he stopped to listen. He heard something, maybe the wind harp changing pitch as the pressure rose. Then the river that fed the lake surged. Or a tremor loosened the plug. The water rushed. In a breath, it turned this basin into a bowl, then into a throat. It sucked air and sound into itself. It dragged horses off their feet and men from their saddles. It carried them into the tunnels. Some reached this chamber. They lit torches, tallied their days, and sought a way out. Others were swept into the black pool and did not come back. When it was done, the basin looked clean. No bodies. No scattered gear. The water left a skin of pale mineral on the ground as it went down through the cracks, sealing tracks like a lid. Who would do this? Toru whispered, though no one was near. Someone who knew the land, Daigo said. Someone who wanted the army gone without a battle. Someone who could send a steward back 4 bridges, and make sure the men took the shaded way at the right hour. Kajiwara, Toru breathed. Daigo said nothing. He set the lantern down and crouched by the wall with the tally marks. He ran his finger from one groove to the next. He counted 312. If the marks told days, that was nearly a year, not possible in such a place with no food. If they told men who made it this far, who survived the first night, that was a different story. 312 out of 500. And what then? He found the answer etched faintly near the little bird. A series of arrows, scratched by a hand that had begun to shake, pointed toward a low hole near the chamber's floor. Daigo knelt and pushed his arm into the dark. His fingers met cold air and the faintest draft. He widened the hole with the crowbar until a man could squeeze through. On the other side, a narrow crawl ran downhill and bent left. He went in on his belly, lantern pushed ahead. 10 body lengths on, the crawl dropped into a short chute. He slid and landed on a shelf of stone, breath loud in his head, heart beating like a drum. He raised the lantern. He was in a cave that opened like a mouth to a pale glow. He stepped forward and saw water again, this time lit from above by a slit in the rock. The light painted a bright path across the pool to a tunnel that led away. On the damp sand near his foot, he saw lines drawn with a stick, 3 short lines crossing a longer one, the mark men make when they promise to come back. He followed the glow and came to the end of the cave. The slit overhead was too high to reach, but the tunnel leading away angled toward the coast. He tasted the air and felt the slightest pulse, like the tide but slower. He smiled then, for the first time since he reached the village. He and Toru retraced their steps and climbed out to daylight. They moved fast across the hills to a ravine Daigo had seen from above. It was a seam in the land that led toward the sea. At its end, they found a place where the rock fell into darkness again. The smell of salt came up. He threw a pebble and heard a splash, then the soft echo of waves on rock. A sea cave, reachable only when the tide dropped. They waited. The sun slid west. At low tide, they climbed down and waited on the edge of black water. Daigo lifted the lantern and called once, not a name, just a sound like a greeting from a traveler. Something answered, a dull thud, human because it allowed hope. They pushed deeper. The cave curved and then opened. At the back, on a ledge above the titterline, were bundles of old cloth and weathered gear stacked in careful rows. Helmets without crests. Blankets patched 100 times. A pair of boots with a small bell sewn into the strap. Daigo touched the bell with one finger. It chimed softly, a miniature of the tide bell on the cliff. He did not have to speak. The cave itself said the rest. Some of the 500 had found this path. They had crawled through the stone, found this sea gate, and learned the tides by taste and sound. They had waited. They had left gear that would betray their names. They had become ghosts in the eyes of those who loved them because it was safer that way. He looked up. A figure stood in the mouth of a side tunnel, a torch in one hand, a long pole in the other. The man watched Daigo with the deep stillness of someone who had run out of fear long ago. His hair was gray, cut short. His shoulders were still those of a soldier. "You took your time," the man said at last, voice rough with years of salt air. Daigo let out a breath he had not known he held. "Captain Ren," he said. The captain climbed down and set the torch in a cleft. He studied Daigo's face with a soldier's habit, a fast inventory, then a kind regard. "Do you come for truth?" Ren asked, "or for proof to fit a story someone at a desk already wrote?" "Truth," Daigo said. The captain nodded once. "Then listen." They sat on the ledge, above the reach of the tide, while Toru warmed his hands over the torch. Ren spoke plainly, like a man who had told himself a hard tale 1,000 times and worn the edges smooth. When he began, Daigo saw it happen again, the march, the turn, the soft ground under hooves, the wall of air as the first breath of water raced through the pass. "The sound came first," Ren said. "Not like a river, like a flute with a giant's lungs. The birds rose, and the ground under the pale patch trembled like a drumhead. I raised my hand to stop the column, but the signal horn did not carry. The wind pulled the sound out of it. Then a sheet of water slid across the basin like spilled oil. The first rank tried to wheel. The water caught the horse's legs and dragged. Men grabbed men. I heard the bell on my bridle ring once, then never again." He closed his eyes. "We did what trained men do. We formed. We moved toward the higher rim. But the water took the line and unraveled it. I saw the hidden cut in the hill and knew then that this was not the anger of the sky or the sea. It was a hand. A planned release. We forced our way toward the cut and found the tunnel. Inside, some found their feet. We made torches from saddlecloth and oil. We counted. We marked the wall for every man who staggered in." 312, Daigo murmured. Ren turned his face. "So our scratches lasted." "They did. We found the crawl to the lower cave on the third day," Ren said. "When the tide fell, we saw light and the taste of the sea. We sent men out in pairs. The first pair was swept against the rocks when the tide turned fast. The second pair learned to hold the walls and to breathe with the water. The third pair reached open air. They crawled out at a black cove where the cliffs fold in on themselves. Fishermen found them at dawn. The men did not speak their names. The fishermen did not ask." Ren looked at Toru. Toru shrugged and lifted his palms. "We know when a man's name can harm him more than help him," he said. "We feed a mouth without asking who it once shouted for." Ren's jaw worked. "Kajiwara sent me a note 2 days before the march. It came rolled in wax. It said the Black Channel Bridge was weak. It said the shaded path through the basin would keep the men cool. It said we must enter the pass at first light to make the midday crossing of the hills. I smelled wax and nothing else." "Did he mention the lake?" Daigo asked. Ren's mouth tightened. "He never spoke of it. But he hesitated the week before when I asked him to ride the ridge. He said his horse did not like narrow places. It is a small thing. Many men dislike heights. But now the small things beat like a drum. He sent us to the right place at the right time and kept his hands clean." "Why?" Toru asked. "Who wants 500 men to vanish without a fight?" "Someone who cannot afford a battle," Ren said, voice flat. "Someone who wants a victory that leaves no smoke or blood-spattered field to stir revenge. Someone with more earth than steel." "The landholder to the north," Daigo said softly. "Lord Muro. He has argued with Lord Ishida over water rights and border stones for years. He keeps engineers, not poets. He built terraces where goats refuse to climb. He would see this as a clean answer." A line vanished with the tide. A deny with a smile. Ren nodded once. "We sent a messenger along the crawl on the 5th day. He carried our sign, the 3 short lines, and a strip of cloth cut from my banner. He never returned. On the 10th day, we left the chamber for good. Some men chose the sea cave and the hard learning of tides. Others climbed through a chimney and made for the woods. A dozen became woodcutters. 2 became temple servants. 10 left their armor beneath rocks and walked east until they saw the sea from a different shore. We swore not to gather in public. We kept a trove here, gear, blankets, ropes. We came like shadows when mountain storms hit villages. We cut brush ahead of summer fires. We dug channels for floodwater in spring nights when no one would thank us. We were not ghosts by nature. We became them because men who killed without bodies love silence. Daigo did not speak for a long time. The torch hissed. The tide flexed like a sigh. Will you come back? Toru asked finally. Ren's smile was quick and tired. To what? To be displayed like a banner and used as a story? No. But I will give names for the dead, if that is what you came for. I came for truth, Daigo said, and truth walks on names. Give me as many as you can bear to speak. Ren reached into a bundle and drew out a roll of thin wood, bound with cord. He placed it in Daigo's hands. Take this to Lord Ishida, he said. Tell him the names. Tell him it was the land that took us on a signal. Tell him the man who sent the signal wore clean shoes. They climbed out at dusk. The stars were peeking through a sky the color of wet slate. Toru walked with long, even strides, as if distance did not bother him as long as he knew the next step. Daigo's mind ran ahead to Lord Ishida's garden, to Kajiwara's smooth face, to the way the officer's mouth had flattened when the word betrayal was spoken. He did not ride to the manor. He went to the ridge above the basin and waited for morning. As dawn rose, he watched men in plain clothes move along the far hills. They stopped at the curved embankment and knelt as if in prayer. They were measuring damage. They were engineers. One had a rolled map case. They were not Lord Ishida's men. Their cloaks bore a small, broken line sewn near the hem in white, Moro's field mark. Daigo did not stop them. He watched. He learned their faces. He counted who ordered whom. Then he rode to Lord Ishida's gate and asked for the Lord, Kajiwara, and the officer with the straight mouth. They met in the same garden, the same wind playing the same leaves. Daigo set the roll of wood on the table and unbound it. Names lined the thin slips, written in clean hand, each with a mark beside it. Some had a small cross. Some had 3 dots. The language of survivors is quiet. These are my men, Lord Ishida said, voice low. His hand hovered over the first lines and did not land. I know this handwriting. Ren's. He lives, Daigo said, and others with him. They took a way through the earth and then a way through the tide. They hid because their enemy hid the wound he struck. I know who built the dam and who cut it. I know who sent you a warning about a broken bridge and kept his mouth closed on the rising lake. Lord Ishida turned his head very slowly toward Kajiwara. The steward's lips parted and closed. He lifted his hands. I did as ordered, Kajiwara began. By whom? Daigo asked. Kajiwara's gaze flicked from the lord to the officer to Daigo and back. By a messenger who wore the North's colors. He said he carried a safe conduct. He delivered a letter. What letter? Lord Ishida asked. Kajiwara swallowed. A letter accusing Captain Ren of planning to defect. It said the captain would lead the column across Moro's land and then straight to the border, the long way, so he could supply the enemy with our losses. The letter advised sending a steward to fetch the bridge crew at the right time to test the captain's plan. You believed a stranger over the man who kept lists of broken planks, Daigo said, his voice even. Kajiwara's face flushed. I am a steward, not a judge. I thought I protected you, my lord. You protected a lie, Lord Ishida said quietly. The lord's voice did not rise. Gentle voices sometimes frighten men more. You protected it because it came wrapped in importance. Bring me the letter. Kajiwara hesitated, then bowed and hurried away. When he returned with a wooden box, Daigo sniffed before the lid opened. He smelled wax, fresh, and the faint scent of a certain resin used by scribes in the north. The letter inside bore Lord Moro's seal. Daigo had no doubt it would prove authentic if a scribe in the capital were asked. That was the beauty of the trap. Clean on the surface. Rotten in the grain. This must be answered, the straight-mouthed officer said, anger glittering in his eyes. It will be, Lord Ishida said. Not with a shout. With a weight that does not lift. He turned to Daigo. What do you require? Protection for the families of the men who survived, Daigo said. Quiet protection. A cart of rice for a village that knows not to ask names. A small shrine at the basin rim with no inscription anyone from the north would notice. A tether cut in a way that looks like an accident when engineers from the north inspect their work. Lord Ishida held Daigo's gaze. A slow smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. Engineers can stumble, he said. Even on flat ground, Daigo replied. Kajiwara broke in, voice shaking. I am sorry, my lord. I thought I was strong. I was not. Lord Ishida looked at him the way a father looks at a son who has knocked over a lantern. You will carry rice to the coast, he said, not unkindly. You will repair the roof of the cliff temple with your own hands. You will set the tide bell right when it leans. When I require you again, I will send for you. Until then, hear the bell and remember its warning. Kajiwara bowed so low his hands brushed the stones. 3 days later, under a sky the color of tin, Lord Ishida's men hammered a new marker into the earth at the rim of the basin, a simple post with a carved wave. Nothing else. It watched the pale ground the way a sentinel watches a door. In the hills to the north, a team of men in plain cloaks tried to clear a channel clogged by a recent fall. The earth around their tools became soft without warning. 2 men fell to their knees. 3 more pulled them free. A small cart tipped slowly onto its side, spilling wooden rails into a shallow gully. When they left, their survey poles leaned and then slid a little, as if the ground itself had grown tired of holding them. In the black cove, Toru and a handful of fishermen unloaded a barrel of rice. The barrel rolled straight into the hands of a man with a gray beard and a scar at the corner of his mouth. He was not Captain Ren. He was one of the riders who had learned the language of the tide. He smiled at Toru and touched his neck where a fisherman wears a charm. There is a way men say thank you without saying it, and it was enough. Daigo stood with them a moment, then walked the narrow path up the cliff. He carried the roll of names and a packet of letters sealed with Lord Ishida's mark. At the temple, he set a small offering near the bell, a carved bird with spread wings, smoothed by his own thumb. The monk nodded as if they had spoken without words. The story of the vanishing changed after that, but not in the way stories often change when facts arrive. People still said the earth swallowed 500 men. They still lit lanterns on the cliff and listened for the bell. But they added small truths that did not brag. They said some of the 500 slipped out of the hill at night and walked like shadows. They said fields found digged channels after a heavy rain no one remembered digging. They said a family received a bundle of salted fish on a winter morning with no note and no footsteps in the snow. They said a boy learned to mend nets from a man who never wore a crest but tied a tiny bell to his belt in summer. The capital recorded the disruption of supply and transport routes due to unauthorized works on a northern estate. It reassigned engineers. It did not speak of lakes and tunnels. It did not like to put its seal on the parts of the land that could not be held with ink. As for Daigo, he finished his work and waited for the last thing he needed, a night when legend and truth could touch hands for a breath. He did not wait long. Storm season came. The sea turned heavy, its back arched against the wind. Clouds dragged their feet along the hills. He climbed to the basin at dusk and stood beneath the new post with its carved wave. He closed his eyes and listened. The first heavy drop struck, slow and far apart. Then the rain came in a sheet. The pale ground darkened and glowed at once, as if it liked the weight. From the far ridge, a small light moved. Then another. A line of lanterns curled along the path above the basin like beads on a string. For a heartbeat, the light bent and gathered. Daigo's head filled with the fisherman's word, swallowed. He held his breath. The line did not become a single star this time. It steadied, corrected, and split into 3 threads that moved down toward the village. Hours later, when the storm had passed like a great animal shouldering its way inland, Daigo walked the village lanes. He found fresh trenches cut to draw water away from doors, the cuts lined with fresh pine boughs to slow the flow. He found a stack of chopped wood beneath a widow's eaves. He found the temple's bell rope braided anew. He found a small bundle at the door of the storehouse, a pair of boots with a small bell sewn into a strap, polished with care and sized for a boy. He returned to the shore. The sky was clear, and the first big stars flickered. The tide came in, carrying a thin skin of foam. In the cave, water whispered against the stone where names had been spoken. The roll of names lay in his pack, safe and dry. He would take it to the capital, where someone would copy it into a book that slept behind a scroll screen. Then he would drift to another road, another cracked bell, another valley where the land had learned to keep secrets. Before he left, he stood alone at the basin rim for a while. He thought about the clean way the enemy had chosen and the cleaner one Ren had made out of wreckage. He thought about Kajiwara carrying rice and replacing roof tiles one by one. He thought of Toru with his crowbar and quiet stubbornness. He thought of 312 tally marks scratched in stone by hands that would not give up counting. There are stories that end with a cheer, Daigo knew, and there are stories that end with a nod. This one deserved the nod. 500 went in. Some died with their faces lifted toward a dark ceiling and a walked-away drumbeat in their ears. Some found a way to live beneath and behind the land that tried to erase them. All of them gave something that could not be measured by flags. On certain nights after that, when weather rolled in from the north and the fox's throat breathed cool air, people swore they heard a sound from the basin. Not a scream or a wail, something better. A slow, steady rhythm, as if many hands were tapping their fingers in time. A count. A promise that someone still remembered. Daigo never argued with those who told him this. He simply listened, and if the wind carried the faintest beat, he counted along quietly until it faded. Then he walked down to the cliff and set his hand on the tide bell's dented rim. Those who needed the truth got it. Lord Ishida put stones where they were most useful. Lord Muro learned that a victory without smoke can still stain the hands that hold the shovel. Kajiwara learned the weight of a tile. Toru learned the path to the cave with his eyes closed. Ren learned there are honors that do not require a crest. As for what really happened to 500 warriors, this is the cleanest telling Daigo could carry. The land was made to do a man's work on a chosen morning, and it did it well. Water took the place of arrows. A basin took the place of a field. Some men died without graves the size their courage deserved. Others climbed through stone, learned to breathe with the tide, and turned shame into service so quiet that no song could catch it. The world above carried on. Rice grew. Bells rang. A child laughed in a lane that had not flooded because a trench appeared overnight. And when travelers stopped at the cliff temple and asked about the post with the carved wave, the monk said only this: the sea speaks with patience. The hills, too. If you want to know what happened here, listen long enough to hear them talk to each other. He would point toward the fox's throat then, at the way the two rocks lean in, as if sharing something too important to say aloud. And if the traveler stood there in a late wind, the sound in those rocks might have felt almost like a drum traveling through stone, 312 beats, and the kindness that followed them. One more thing, whispered into the gaps between iron waves and the bell's low swing, on clear nights, if a lantern line appears along the ridge and does not break into one bright star, that is not a trick of a curse. That is a watch. That is a promise that quiet hands still move along the edge of danger, as they did on the day 500 went in and the land tried to make them vanish. The hands did not vanish. They learned a different way to hold the country together, with a spade scraped in darkness and a bell rung 3 times when no one was looking. When Daigo finally took his leave, he did not look back. He did not need to. The story did not end in a garden or a cave. It ended everywhere the ground hummed and the sea lifted its rim under the moon. It ended with men who chose to become an unseen wall. It ended with a basin that remembered, a carved wave that weathered, and a boy's small bell that chimed when he ran down to the shore at dawn, laughing, while the world went on, steady, held, and, in its own quiet way, saved.